God has good plans for us. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says He's plans for a hope and a future. In Deuteronomy, it said God gives us a choice between choosing life or death, and He encourages us to choose life so that we and our descendants will live. You know, when we spoke about, Marissa spoke about Jessica, we had a choice before us. We had a choice of choosing life. And it wasn't easy. But there was no way we were, I remember reading up, I said, God, we prayed. I said, God, do miracles. People, the doctor's saying that the ultrasound says she's got a severe congenital, she'll probably be a Downs. Well, it turned out she wasn't a Downs. But regardless, we were going to keep her. I said, you can do a miracle, and people just say, wow, look at God, and the study showed this. Because I watch these movies, on Prime, and it's about miracles where things just change, But as we got closer and closer to the delivery, we saw that she was going to have a severe congenital heart malformation. And sometimes God doesn't turn things around like we would say, We have financial problems, and you say, okay, God, do a miracle, get me out of this financial problems, and we keep spending on our visa like there's no tomorrow. But He tries to change the way we see things. And for us, the change was, okay, God, we're going to go through this, no matter what the outcome. And there were miracles along the way that we saw. For example, they said that her heart, the valve was completely blocked, and there was a small pinhole that even the cardiologists were amazed. They said, we didn't think so. So they were able to thread a catheter and open up the valve. Her heart was half formed, so only one side of her heart was functioning. And after they opened up, the miracle was that the heart started to pump. They said, we're going to try this. We don't know if it's going to work. We saw God doing that, doing small, I call them, they're big miracles, but for us, they were step by step. So you take a step of faith, and you just sort of don't know what the outcomes are, and you just, but you have to choose to follow Jesus. We're going to choose life, God. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to continue regardless of the outcomes. And we're never guaranteed outcomes. Our outcomes was great. Jessica would have been here today. She was planning to come, and she got a bad viral infection. So I said, okay, you can rest, I prayed that she would be better enough so she could come, but she wasn't, so she wasn't meant to come today. But she'll be here on other days. And maybe she'll even be up and be the speaker. There's a story in the Bible of the Good Samaritan. I like always to refer to that. That's Luke 10, verse 25 to 37. And I won't read all the verses, but as the slideshow goes through, I'll sort of give the different parts of what happened. The Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus really, he told, because a lawyer came up to him and says, what must I do to enter eternal life? And Jesus said, well, you have to follow the commandments. And he gave them a few of the commandments. And he says, I do all this. What more must I do? And he said, you must love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus gave a very expansive part of what a neighbor is, a very demanding part. He talked about the fellow that was left at the side of the road who was left half dead after being robbed. And then many different people passed by. There was a religious leader, there was a businessman, all very busy, who even went to the other side just to ignore it. They didn't want to take care of this person. But the Samaritan stopped by. He bound up the wounds with olive oil and wine. I don't know if he took a little wine for himself at the same time. They don't tell us that. But wine is an antiseptic, olive oil is a healing agent. And then he put him on his donkey and he took him to the inn. And when he went to the inn, he says, here's some money, take care of him, and when I come back, I will pay the rest that I owe you. And we don't know whatever happened to that fellow. We don't know if the person left half dead, survived, was he left handicapped, did he die? It doesn't matter. He took care of him, and where he couldn't take care of him, he had other people taking care of him. So as a community, we're responsible for people who are half dead, or who are quite ill, who are in need. Jesus makes that as a, like he says, love God and love your neighbor. So I mean, that's pretty powerful. It's not just like, oh, it'd be nice if you would do that. It's an option. This is to enter heaven. It's not, like, okay, well, you get extra points if you do that, on the final judgment day. And there's other places in the Bible which talks about, did you care for me? And, did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you clothe me? Did you... So Jesus really wants us to care for each other. It's not an option, it's an obligation. So I'm very troubled by all that's happening in our present world. I'm a doctor. I graduated from McGill University. I consider I was blessed to have the opportunity to I was born in Lachine, Quebec. I don't know if some of you recognize my nephew, Paul Hanash. He looks very much like me. If you haven't noticed the resemblance, then you should get glasses. But we're all raised up in Lachine, Quebec. My grandparents were of Lebanese origin. Actually, 3/4 Lebanese, 1/4 Syrian. Makes my wife's Italian, so my kids are 1/8 Syrian, 3/8 Lebanese, and half Italian. In Quebec, they always say, "C'est quelle race?" What race are you? So it's very important that we know our origins if you haven't been reminded about that. And they were immigrants. They worked hard. My grandmother on my dad's side was a sage-femme, and what do you call that? Midwife, I think. Yeah. So she used to deliver babies for people who couldn't afford it, and no charge. She just did it. Sometimes they would bring some whatever they had, just as because they were farmers. Some of them, they would bring chickens and stuff like that. But they were very committed to helping one another. My dad, who was he didn't have much of an education. I think he went to grade 10. He was a businessman, ran a clothing store. For us, we were everything to him. But during the Second World War, when the Italians, many of the fathers were put in internment camps, he had a clothing store, so he would give mittens and socks for the children so that they wouldn't be cold in the winter time. Little did he know, he wasn't Italian. Little did he know that he died a number of years ago, so he didn't ever know his grandchildren would be half Italian. So our deeds, people say pay forward. Well, it's very biblical that we take care of one another. We don't know what the future holds. What troubles me now is that our society has diminished the value of life, whether it's the preborn. I'd say it's a woman's right. Well, where are the responsibilities of the men who got this woman pregnant? Where is us as a society when the women are struggling financially and says, listen, I have really no choice. What can I do? How am I going to raise this child? I don't even have a place to live. That's where we as a society need to step in, and we need to speak. We need to tell our politicians. We need to help these single moms who are struggling. We need to make sure that we're giving them support. And if somebody comes across us and says, listen, I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do, I don't have a place to live, and I'm going to help you. I'll pay part of your rent. I'll pay part of your groceries. It means it's a sacrifice. And we've stepped in sometimes and helped in ways like that. But all of us, if you say, well, you're a doctor, you can afford it. Yeah, you know. But even it's the small gestures that encourage and help people. And then we're looking at the whole issue of, and I'll be speaking about this a few minutes with some slides, people who are faced with serious illness or conditions, because things have changed. At first was, they could have assisted suicide, euthanasia, if you were at the end of life and they said only a few days left to live. Well, it turned out to be, it could be a few years, it could be decades to live now. But you just want to die, so the doctor's going to take you out. That man who was left half dead, Jesus didn't say, well, you know what? Some people left him, but not the Good Samaritan. He took care of him. And there was nowhere in the Bible that you see, and this was during Roman times, that Jesus abandoned people and said, well, they're better off dead. He healed. We don't all have gifts. We all have some type of gift of healing. I believe we do. We can pray. We can direct them. Me as a doctor, I pray for my patients. Some make it. Some don't. But we pray nevertheless, and we try to help. And during the Roman times, we forget that during the Romans, it was considered noble in the philosophies of the Stoics during the Roman times to end your life. You take poison. If you were weak, feeble-minded, that means you had like mental issues or dementia, or have some type of illness or handicapped. It was considered noble, but Jesus never promoted that. So when we say we're modern, I've been at hearings, parliamentary, Dr. Saba, that was then, and now is now. He says, no, now we even should be more valuing life. Then and that was, during the Roman times, they ended people's life. So you're not so modern today. The other thing that we forget, that the Romans did abortions. I say, no, that's just now. No, they did abortions. In fact, if a mother was single, poor, that was an ideal candidate for an abortion. Jesus would have been the ideal candidate during Roman times for an abortion. Came from a single mom. He wasn't married to Joseph at that point. And they were poor, dirt poor, so poor that they couldn't even afford a room in an inn. So we wouldn't even be here worshiping Jesus today. We wouldn't have been saved. He wouldn't have been resuscitated from the grave, came alive 3 days later. And all of the philosophy that we have based on the Christian faith of helping the poor, of feeding, people who are poor, healing the sick, that would have been all gone, because the Romans didn't believe in that. If you were poor, forget it, that's you weren't valued. So we need to get back to that idea of valuing one another and caring for one another. And at the end of this, I will be glad to answer your questions, because everybody has questions about some of these issues. Some of you, may not want to speak out out loud because there are things that bother you. So I think I'm going to go to my presentation, if that's okay, my slide presentation, because I'm going to focus now a little bit on the whole issue of euthanasia and assisted suicide. The book, by the way, that will be available, I think, at the end of this presentation. Those who want to buy it's $20. Do you want to go to the next slide there? It's why are euthanasia-assisted suicide not medical treatments? Yeah. I spoke about the Good Samaritan. Hippocrates, who was a Greek philosopher and a physician, said that we should never give any poison either to end a person's life, or we should not give an abortifacient. They used to use medicines like they did that caused abortions back then. And anyone who took that oath, and in some medical schools still they have some variation of that, would not end intentionally the preborn or person after they're born. Because medicine really has a mandate to heal and not to hasten death. And the next slide is that we're supposed to be healers and not executioners. And the other thing that we forget when they try to confuse people and say that euthanasia, assisted suicide are part of palliative care. Euthanasia and neither of them are part of palliative care. Palliative care is where you really relieve any pain or distress that people have and give them all the supports. Euthanasia is when a doctor directly gives a lethal injection, and assisted suicide is where they give some type of medication. The next slide, this is Michelangelo's painting, and I use this where it shows God giving life to Adam, because we're created in the image of God. And when you kill man, you're killing God's image. Next. Part of our oath is to care and to cure sometimes. We don't always cure, but to alleviate any suffering. And this is my commitment. Next slide. In the law, which is in Canada and Quebec, we're not obligated to euthanize, but we're obligated to refer, and I refuse to refer. Because whenever I give a referral, that means I give a recommendation. If I send you to a cardiologist or a lung specialist, and the person is a bad cardiologist or lung specialist, I'm sending you down the wrong road. And for me to send people for euthanasia is a wrong recommendation. The Nuremberg trials, which were the Nazis who participated and were found guilty, they showed referral is equivalent to participating, because they would send people to hospitals, doctors would send them where they knew they were going to be killed. And they were found guilty. Next slide. The Quebec and Canada's euthanasia laws really started in Quebec in 2012. I started with hearings, and it was passed, the law in Quebec in 2014. It was copied after the Belgian law for euthanasia, and it was passed in Canada in 2016. I went to court and I fought it. Spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. Would I have done it if I knew I was going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars? Probably not. But once you're in a fight, you just keep fighting. And we were able to stop the law for a short time. We lost an appeal. In the next slide, Belgium now has euthanasia all the way up to children. And Canada is planning to do that next. And you can go to the next. Okay, the bills, yeah. Yeah, so it's being extended more and more. Actually, in next year, March, people who are depressed or schizophrenic will have the right to be euthanized. And that's Canadian law. And presently we're fighting that. There's a bill by a Conservative MP, Tamara Jensen, and if you hear it, I'll pass, there'll be probably some demonstration in the next month or two, and we'll let you know in Ottawa. She's trying to stop it with Bill C-218. You can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, I use the idea of limited lifeboats because one of the arguments for euthanizing people is say we only have so much care we can give. It's kind of like the Titanic. They only had so many lifeboats, so people died because there weren't enough lifeboats. And the idea is that only useful lives should be saved. That's called the utilitarian model of bioethics. Jesus turned everything upside down. It didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, disabled. He would go out and heal lepers. What use were they? But he still cared for them. The prostitute, he cared for them. What use were they? It didn't matter. They're God's creatures because they're made in the image of God. So the idea of the limited lifeboats model is, well, you know, we only have so many lifeboats. You know, why not just take care of people who are not, who are useful to society? But that's wrong, because nobody ever excused the Titanic because they only had so many lifeboats. And the people who got in were the stronger ones. It wasn't the weaker. The ones who were left out often were the poor ones. So what we need to do is build more lifeboats. And people say, well, you can't afford it. I believe you can, and you will. If you follow Christ, if our society follows God, he will bless us. Because he does bless. And if you go back in the history of the Jewish people, when they were following him, they were blessed. They were blessed. And I even say that when I'm in parliamentary commission hearings. You know, we can't be afraid to say what we believe. We have a right to our opinion. It's guaranteed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, even though that the government doesn't always follow that. But it doesn't matter. We still hold on to that. And by the way, the Canadian Charter begins with the whole idea that based on the God and the whole principle of the supremacy of God. It begins it right at the beginning, so you can argue that. You know, our laws, the Constitution is based on the supremacy of God, the God of the Bible. Next slide. And Marissa shared the story of our life, and we have an impact. You know, when a doctor gives a hopeful prognosis or says, you know, we'll try and everything, it gives people hope. If a doctor, and if it wasn't us, and if the doctor, some other person who feeling depressed and hopeless and had bad situation, they may have given up and said, we'll go for the abortion. So we have an impact on people's lives. Next one. So it says we should provide all the supports as a society, emotional, physical, financial, and spiritual, and we should never intentionally encourage or end life. I'm going to give next slide. See, when a person's in distress, we need to support them and help them. And that is not just a doctor or nurse. We as the body of Christ have a responsibility to give encouraging words. And you know, your life may not be the best. You may be going through crisis, and you say, well, who am I to give, who am I to give hope? You know, who am I to tell people what they should hope for? My life's a mess. What's God doing for me? It doesn't matter what God's doing for you. Do for others as you would have them do unto you. All right? So, even if you, and sometimes I find when I'm, you know, going through a rough patch, I have to forget about myself, you know. Woe is me. If I had kept up like that at 50, I would never gotten married. I look at that. Because I was my sister's here. For 7 years, she can tell you, I lived in her basement. I didn't want it. I felt sorry for myself, you know. Finally, my brother-in-law, he says, why don't you go get a life? I thought he told me go get a wife. So that's why I got married anyway. This is supposed to be a very grim information I'm giving you about selling death and stuff, but it's all part of our, you know what, we have to give hope. That's where we are. That's where as Christians, that's where we're different. We give hope. And if people decide to end their life, we still hope and we still pray and we go into the next person. If every time I lost a patient, I gave up, I would have quit medicine long time ago, you know. So now the next slide, it talks about some of the euphemisms, some of how people sell death. They'll say dying with dignity, medical aid, compassionate choices. That's, I don't want to use the word crap, that's not very medical. It's garbage, okay? It's false, it's false publicity, fake news. That's what it is, it's fake news. Because it isn't, because you really cared, you would support people. The Canadian government figured, there's a study out, it's in Sage magazine. This came out this past year, this last year. Government would sell for the next 20 years, approximately the next 20 years, $1.3 trillion by euthanizing people who have mental disorders, who are poor or drug addicts, and the elderly. So they say, why not? 1.3 trillion. So some of you there, if you start thinking, well, that's not a bad idea, you better start talking to God a little bit more. Because it is a bad idea. Because we're not, the Good Samaritan gave money out of his pocket. He gave money out of his pocket to help. Medicalizing euthanasia, that's how they sell it. They say, well, the doctor did it, and the doctor recommended. So that's how they do it. They used to, you remember when doctors used to recommend that, well, most of you are too young to remember that, but the doctors would say smoking was good for you. And they would be in Life magazine. I've seen some of those ads. Surveys, polls, they say, example, if you're really in a horrible situation, agonizing pain, 99 years old, cancer all over your body spread through you, and you only had a few days to live. And people say, well, yeah, what's a few days? That's how they sell it. But now it's not like that, because with palliative care, you can take care of the pain and ease people out. Well, the person asked for it. That's the voluntary act. It's like if a person says they want to kill themselves, you shall jump off the bridge. It's your choice. No. Next. We make it legal, then we figure it's okay. That's what we've done in Canada. We glamorize it. They have all these movies, Hollywood, you know, beautiful death surrounded by family. Why don't you surround you and stay a night watch with people? We watched our mom pass away. We stayed with her. We had help. You know, it wasn't easy. And then she eventually, I remember just before she died, she saw my dad through the window. Georgina, my sister, called, come, we're losing mom. Saw my dad, and then she went. You know, we gave her whatever pain medication was just to ease her pain, but nothing to accelerate her death, you know. It's interesting. A few months later, my daughter, Jessica, says, Dad, I had a dream. I said, what did you dream, sweetheart? I saw grandma and grandpa, we say sit-tu, sit-ti, whatever. Drove up the driveway. And I ran out, saw my granddad. She never knew granddad. He gave me a big hug. He says, Grandma's told me all the beautiful stories about you, and I love you. Gives her a hug. A month later, so. Like a vision. Children see visions. But because they're in a better place. Because we are often wonder, say, you know, was everybody says, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Well, that's it. It's part of our life, but we still try to care for people right to the end. You have lobbying, you know, dying with dignity groups. You have apathy by the public. It doesn't concern me. Well, it concerns somebody here one day, or a family member. I have people coming all the time telling me, I can't believe it. So-and-so did the MAID, medical aid in dying. And one woman came just this past week in my office. It was her sister. And she had lung problems, breathing problems. And she wasn't dying, but she says, I don't want to agonize and die. She was young, 50s. And she's still troubled by it. They falsify the numbers. They say it's only a tiny handful. I remember Barrett, the Minister of Health, he said, it'd be only a handful before they pass it on Quebec. He says, count it on my hand. Right? Now in Canada, we have had over 90,000 medical aid and dying, not terminal patients, people with handicaps, severe. They talk extreme language, horrible, agonizing, false claims. If you're not allowed to be euthanized, they may throw themselves off a bridge. There's a false certainty of death. People know who will die in 6 months. It's 50-50. We can't predict it. Studies show that. And I put in my book, I write some of those numbers down. Cure, diagnosis, severe cancer, and terminal cancer. 20% errors according to the U.S. insurance studies, because they're always interested in insurance companies. I had a patient who described my book, came into my office with a cough with his daughter. And I said, listen, I'll just do a chest x-ray just in case it's been bothering a couple of weeks. I call him next day. I want you to come here, talk about your x-ray results. It was, it says probably cancer, lung cancer. Right away, I said, listen, we're going to do scans, we're going to do this, that. We'll start you on treatment right away. Stop, doctor. He says, I know what you believe, and I don't necessarily believe what you believe. I said, what do you mean you believe? He says, I know you're against euthanasia, but I'm not against it. If it's my time, it's my time. I said, listen, at least go through a few studies and make sure, because these x-ray scan, same thing, probably cancer. Listen, we'll do a biopsy. I convinced him to go for a biopsy. He had the biopsy. And it turned out that he ended up having a first biopsy, they couldn't get anything. So I sent him to another specialist. They found that he had lymphoma. Oh, it's not funny, but anyway, a resident, he calls me back. He says, you lied to me. You told me I had lymphoma. I have lung cancer. I said, where did you get that? Let me speak to. They had mixed up the papers with another patient. Thank God I had spoken to the specialist before. So things happen late. But this was over 6-7 years ago. Cancer-free, no lymphoma, cured. He writes, whenever I do a conference, he's always listening, and he always makes nice comments. And they say that if you're against euthanasia, you're for suffering. This is another fake news. Real fact is, if you're for palliative care, people who have palliative care, which means giving them all the support, the medications, a team, emotional support, financial support, they live longer because they're not suffering, so they're able to eat and drink, and they have a better quality of life, and they're happier. But you don't ever hear about that. And they always talk about euthanasia being progressive, abortion being progressive. Anyway, again, fake news. Next slide here. So after they're talking about mature minors in the next year or two, it hasn't passed yet, but there's a committee that was set. That means a 12-year-old can decide without the parents' consent to be euthanized. No. I talk in the next slide the story of Nadine, who's a young girl. Now she's in her 20s. She had severe form of leukemia, bone marrow transplant, failed this, failed that, and then she survived finally. And in Europe, someone after 1 or 2 chemo rounds, they can the child can decide to have their lives ended. So we're going to be throwing away lives Yeah, that's the one here. So children will be encouraged to throw away their lives, and that's wrong. They're doing that now in Belgium. In my book, I describe about 2 children with cystic fibrosis, and just right after the children were euthanized, a few months later, a new drug came out, which reverses the disease. Would these parents have decided, and it may not have been the parents, it could have been the child themselves, to have these lives ended if they knew about this new treatment? I've heard people say when I say that, well, at least they had their free choice. What is a free choice? Free choice is when you know everything. You don't know, Eve had her free choice. Adam had his free choice. But they were misled, If I was to go speak to God right now, I would say, God, you know what? Maybe, if they had a good lawyer, they could have gotten off. Because today, if you're deceived, it's an argument. But God gave them enough. He gives us enough. You can say, well, I was deceived. Like I'm telling you right now, this is a deception. And you say, well, what does he know? He's a doctor, And besides, he's half Lebanese. What does he know, But half Italian. But I'm saying you can make every argument you want. But God, in the end, he says, I give you life, I give you death. That's it. He told Eve, you eat this, eat. You're going to die. Well, I was deceived. He said, maybe I won't die. What did God tell us? He says, you're going to listen to some fancy suited lawyer, or you're going to listen to God? So that's the answer. God doesn't, he doesn't listen to lawyers anyway. Even if they had a good lawyer, he wouldn't listen to them. The World Medical Association, the next slide, and we were at the meetings. Keep going. There we go, World Medical Association. It represents 10 million people and 10 million doctors in over 110 countries. And in 2019, and Marissa and I were at the meeting, and we lobbied hard to get them to not promote euthanasia, because Canada was going there. The Canadian Medical Association says, well, this is good, and just go neutral. If you go neutral, well, that's what happened. The Canadian Medical went neutral in Canada before the Supreme Court, so they say if you're not against it, then maybe you're for it. So much for neutrality. You got to take a stand. Jesus says somewhere in the, I'm not a biblical scholar, Pastor Lorenzo could probably tell you, he says lukewarm, that's a Laodicean church, Laodicean, yeah, Laodicean. Because apparently they had warm water or something in the pipes by the time the hot springs got there. He says, I'll spew you out. He doesn't want us to be lukewarm. He wants us to be strong. Well, I learned that from my mom. My mom was, anyone knew my mom, she was like, She was the one that would spank us, because my dad, he's too gentle. In fact, we never got much spankings because my mom says, wait till your dad comes. You'll see. He never spanked us, my dad. So I was always looking forward to my dad. He said, what happened, son? I explained it. He said, okay, do better next time, son. But we have to stand firm. We have to, say no to euthanasia. And this is what the World Medical Association reiterates: its strong commitment to the principles of medical ethics, utmost respect maintained for human life. Therefore, is firmly opposed to euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. Firmly. Not maybe in certain cases. Next. Sir Winston Churchill. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So, if we don't learn from the Second World War where they were euthanizing people, And remember, during the Second World War, can't talk about I'm not saying the word Nazis, I never said it. But during the Second World War, the German government in power at that time, whatever you want to call their governments, under Adolf Hitler, whatever government that was, because you can't say Nazis, they started going after their own people. You know, the handicapped child, the mentally ill, the schizophrenics, homosexuals, you know, all of those people, he got rid of them. They were undesirables, and they were a cost to society. And then they spread it to gypsies and Jews and Polish and this and priests, you know, pastors, you know, Christians. You know, Bonhoeffer, you guys have to watch the movie Bonhoeffer. They're all various places. And he said, Bonhoeffer said, not to speak is to speak. That means if you stay neutral, if you don't do anything, if you just kind of lie low, nobody will see you. No, we have to stand up. You know, so as a society, we have to say no and not be afraid. You cannot do safeguards. It's been expanding. The Groningen Protocol talks about doing euthanasia for children. In Netherlands, now Canada will be doing the depressed. They do people who have children, completed life, keep going. Oh, I wrote here, this slide said it's 90,000. My slide was a few years ago. I made the slide. I should have updated. Sorry, Pastor. No. The Quebec removed the criteria of end of life in 2019, and Canada didn't oppose it. So now it's, and then the Canadian legislature extended to those who have chronic conditions. So you have a chronic condition, 20, 30 years to live, you can have your life ended. And then you have many reports. I won't go through all the different reports, but people with psychiatric disorders, disabled people, people who have, you can skip to all these various slides, but the UN Convention on the Rights of the Person said that Canada is doing is contrary to Article 10 of the United Nations. We say, well, who cares about people with disabilities? 22% of Canadians have disabilities, so they can all be candidates for euthanasia. And mental depression, which is coming next year, 1 in 5 at any one time have mental disorders. I was in the hearings about a month ago, Bill C-218, where Tara Jansen, there's some good people who are fighting this. She spoke, and then somebody from the Liberals, they went on and on. Well, we have to have consensus. We're studying this. Blah 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 blah. I was every once in a while, my friend would wake me up and say, you know, we've got to listen to this. And then someone from the block, oh yeah, well, you guys are just talking about depressed people. You should see the schizophrenics. Who wouldn't want them? She didn't say, who wouldn't want them to die? But basically, that's what she said. You know, that's a horrible life to be scared. Well, let's treat them. Let's give people who have mental health disorders the supports they need, the proper. If I refer somebody right now to a psychiatrist, takes minimum 5 months, 6, 7 months. The average is 5 months. The studies show there's 5 months waiting time. But with the law, in 3 months, if you sign a paper with a mental health disorder, you'll be euthanized. So 2 or 3 months later, you get a call from a psychiatrist. You're gone. What happened to him? He died. That's what it is. And the psychiatrist cannot agree on what is irremediable psychiatric illness. Half will say, this one's irremediable. The other half will say, no, it's not irremediable. So imagine, we have something that we can't even figure out. it's irremediable, and that's one of the criteria. You'll find somebody to sign up a psychiatric. Who wants to be around depressed people? Everyone wants to get out of my life. You're making me depressed. So, is that what we're going to do? Kill them? So we don't have to deal with them? You know? This is what it says. Jesus cared for people. People that were, they call it, demon possessed. People who had flagging around seizures. He cared for them. And he's given us tools and knowledge, to care for people. And that's what our responsibility is. All right. Palliative care. Go to the slide for the palliative care. We're almost. Do I have another hour, Pastor? Is that what you told me? Okay. Oh. Huh?
No, but you're good.
Okay. Okay, so we're coming to the end here. Palliative care is a care where you provide all the supports a person needs at an end of life if somebody really has something and is going on and on and on. By the way, we never know who's going to absolutely. People have. We have a palliative care unit at Lachine, and about a half dozen every year walk out after 3 months. They were supposed to have died. And I've seen people years later who have still alive. I think this will be my last digression, and then I'll finish up with the slides. I had a lady comes to my office, pain in her bones and her back and everything. I do a serious scan. Metastatic lesions. This was over 10 years ago. Over 10 years ago. So I work her up, send her to an oncologist. We can't find the primary, but it's stable. We don't know where the cancer is. I said, would you be willing to be a testimony? This would be ideal. Nobody wants to talk about their health problems, So you never know. Like I said, you never know. The problem with palliative care is not everybody in Canada has access. 70% don't, and that's where we should have started before we started passing laws here and there to kill people. Like I said, the next slide, better quality life, improved survival. There was a classic study that was done which showed that people with lung cancer lived 3 months longer with palliative care. Ongoing treatment, but lived 3 months longer. Next slide. People need to be cared for. I've already said that. Not killed. Next. Conclusion. I told you we'd have a conclusion. So, care for everybody. Support women who are facing the decision of abortion. Studies have shown, and this is done by the group which is for Planned Parenthood, which is very pro-abortion. Guttmacher showed that the reasons women want to have an abortions is because lack of education, finances, professional opportunities. The boyfriend doesn't want it. They're afraid for the health of their baby. So what we do is fix that. Give them the supports they need. Then you'll fix it. Over 90%, that's the reasons. The thing about rape, and that's very, very small. I won't even go there. But if you can fix 99%, you fix the major problem. And we're forcing people to end their lives prematurely because we're not giving them supports. They say, well, it's not their decision. Yeah, but they don't have palliative care. They don't have financial supports. They're not getting the medical care. How many here don't have a family doctor? Yeah, you see, look at that. And if you had a family doctor, you're less likely to miss it. Doctors screen, they say if you have a family doctor, you live longer and better. Why aren't the government not doing it? Well, They could fix it. I wrote an article in La Presse, Où est mon médecin de famille? I think I also wrote in the Suburban, where is my family doctor? In 3 years, we fixed the problem. I sent it to everybody in the government. Don't want to know. Don't bother me with facts, but read the article. And then maybe you can call your MP. Dr. Saba, he said this. How come you're not doing it? 3 years. And in 7 years in the future, everybody has it. But 3 years, we fix the problem right away. So I've already gone through all this. We need to not just stop the legislation from going forward. We got to reverse it. In Slovenia, they reversed it just last year. Reversed it. We need to pray as a church that things will be reversed, that Christ will reign. He says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as is in heaven. It's now we pray. I mean, he's going to come. I believe he's going to come, you know. I hope he comes before tax season. I'm always scratching my head, how do I pay the taxes? But he's going to come. But in the meantime, we need to work. We need to pray. We need to, don't be afraid. Who's to be afraid? You know? Honey, it was a couple years ago, they tried to take my license away. Look it up. Silence Dr. Saba in the Gazette. But God fixed it. They didn't take my license. Why? Because I was fighting for the hospital. You're scaring people, telling people are going to die if you close the hospital. That's the charges. They're going to come up with every charges against you. But it doesn't matter. God's in charge. Can't be afraid. Jesus, 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 Jesus. You know, pray for people. You know, say, can I pray for you? I was going to say, you'll have one in a while to say, no, don't pray for me. You know, but most people will say, please pray. And God will make changes. So pray. Speak to your friends, family, politicians, media. Invite speakers to our church. Thank you, Pastor. We have a website, madeToLive.com. You can watch the story of Jessica. We're actually doing a fundraiser, but you can look that up. It's jessicahartfund.org, Jessica Hart Fund, if you want to come to a nice dinner. And yeah, if you like the book, promote it, tell people to read it, you know. And thank you, Pastor. And I pray for you guys. I pray that God gives you strength, gives you wisdom, gives you health, and gives you long life. Whatever problems you're going through, that he helps fix them as you go to him. We have to come to him, by the way. You know, try to fix our own problems. I tried fixing my singleness. It didn't work. I had to go, God, Jesus, help me, you know, and he did. So I pray God gives you family, supports, community, finances, health, prosperity, long life, again, health. Amen. All right, bye-bye.